About this coming. So from Isaiah 60, excerpts from verses 1 through 6. Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the divine has risen upon you. For darkness shall cover the earth, and thick darkness the peoples. But Yahweh will arise upon you, and God's glory will appear over you. Nations shall come to your light, and kings to the brightness of your dawn. Lift up your eyes and look around. They all gather together. They come to you. They shall bring gold and frankincense, and shall proclaim the praise of God. And then some excerpts from Psalm 72, verses 1 through 7 and 10 through 14. It says, give the king your justice, O God. May the king judge your people with righteousness and your poor with justice. May he defend the cause of the poor of the people, give deliverance to those in need, and crush the oppressor. May the kings of Sheba and Seba bring gifts. May all kings fall down before him. For this one delivers the needy when they call, the poor and those who have no helper. He has compassion on the weak and the vulnerable. From oppression and violence, he redeems their life, and precious is their blood in his sight. And then finally, and I'm going to just turn this down just a little. Finally, from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. In the time of King Herod, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem. And they asked, where is the child who has been born King of the Jews? For we observed his star at its rising and have come to pay homage to him. Now when King Herod heard this, he was frightened, and all Jerusalem with him. And calling together all the chief priests and scribes of the people, he inquired of them where the Messiah was to be born. And they told him, in Bethlehem of Judea, for so it was written by the prophet, and you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for from you shall come a ruler who is to shepherd my people, Israel. Then Herod secretly called for the wise men and learned from them the exact time when the star had appeared. And then he sent them to Bethlehem, saying, go and search diligently for the child, and when you found him, bring me word so that I also may go and pay homage to him. When they had heard the king, they set out, and there ahead of them went the star that they had seen at its rising, until it stopped over the place where the child was. And when they saw that the star had stopped, they were overwhelmed with joy. And on entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother. And they knelt down and paid the child homage. Then opening their treasure chests, they offered him gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh. And then, having been warned in a dream not to return to Herod, they left for their own country by another road. Here ends the readings. As I mentioned, we don't get a lot of time with the story of Jesus' birth before we leave it all together. We get 12 days, the 12 days of Christmas, and then Epiphany comes January 6th, and we move on, and all of a sudden Jesus is being baptized by John. But there is so much basic, powerful, important stuff in the birth stories that I wanted to make sure we at least get back to a few just basic things this morning. Okay, so first, the word Christ. The word Christ is simply the Greek word for the Hebrew word Messiah. Messiah means anointed one. And so the Bible makes it very clear, though, that the Messiah, or the Christ, as it's sometimes called, existed long before Jesus. You get that? Remember that in referring back to the people in Israel when they were in the desert and they didn't have enough water, it says that Moses took his staff and he struck the rock and water came out of it. And the scriptures say, and that rock was Christ. It's interesting. This part of God that's with humans is Christ. And this is important for us to get a hold of. Because while I believe that the Christ came down to Jesus in a world-changing, life-changing, unprecedented way that's incredibly significant and worth gathering around, that's at the center of our whole story, the Christ also comes to humans in other forms, in other times, in other ways. Some people, for example, would suggest that it was the Christ of God, the divine, who came to the man Siddhartha Gautama, who eventually became the Buddha, to reveal divine truth in that culture, in that time, in a different way. Christ coming in a different place. And Christ comes to us. The book of Revelation says in chapter 3, verse 20, that Jesus is standing at the door and knocking. Now, this is the risen Christ knocking at the door of our hearts. So to be a Christian is not just to believe that Jesus was the Christ, but to welcome the Christ into our own beings and to become people who are filled with the same spirit of Christ that Jesus was filled with. It's not complicated, but it's a very different understanding of the whole trajectory of what it means to be a Christian if we really get a hold of this. And it's beautiful, powerful stuff. So, by the way, the Christ will never force him, her, itself on a person. Even Mary had to say, once Gabriel came and said, okay, this is what God is going to do, Mary said, let it be. Those are important words in the story. The drama wasn't done to her. She said, okay, yes, I'm in. Let's do this. Or maybe even better, let's be this. In fact, that would make a great t-shirt when you think about it. Let's be this. That's the invitation to all of us. Will we welcome Christ? Revelation 3, behold, I stand at the door and I'm knocking. Christ is knocking at the door of your hearts. Hopefully right now, always. And it's up to us to constantly say, yes, come on in. Now, Christ is already in, but we can deepen the experience. It won't happen against our will, and it won't happen without our assent. Okay, that's my first basic point. It's important. I hope you get the implications of that. The name Jesus, by the way, is also significant. The baby who was born in the manger was literally named Yeshua, which is a Hebrew word which means deliverer, one who saves or rescues. And so when the Gospels were written in Greek, they translated the Hebrew word Yeshua, and there was also an Aramaic form of it, but that's beside the point. But they translated that word into Greek, which was Iesus, and when that was translated into English, it was Jesus. So if you ever get tired of the way the word Jesus is used sometimes, and there's some circles, so the TV evangelists, for example, they used to kind of drive me crazy how they would pronounce Jesus. It was kind of like, Jesus, and that whole thing. If it ever gets tired, you can use the word Yeshua if you prefer and actually be more accurate. And the deeper truth is, I don't think God really cares what we call God as long as we call. That's all God really wants, is for us to be united and to welcome the presence. And so another point I want to make is Christmas is about presence, TS, but more deeply, it's about presence, CE. God coming and being present to this world in us, through us. Now I don't want to take too much time. It's Communion Sunday and everything. But there's so much stuff here, and there's at least three main points that I want to very quickly make that come out in this whole story of the wise men coming to visit Jesus, being led to us. Those wise men, and chances are they were men, but as I was researching this week, there's not a real clear gender on this. And by the way, the number 3 was never used. We just got that because of the gifts. But there could have been a larger caravan. And the point was that there were people, they mostly, it's suggested they were Zoroastrian priests who came from a different land, a different nation, with a different religious framework. Okay, so that's really what's going on. And the sky itself, the astrological entities in the heavens, as the Bible puts it, led them there. Okay, so here's the 3 points. First, God obviously has a thing for the people on the bottom, for the poor, literally and materially, also emotionally and psychologically. But this is one of the primary points of Jesus being born in the manger, left out, no room. As Psalm 72 that we read put it, for God delivers the needy when they call, the poor and those who have no helper. God has compassion on the weak and the vulnerable. From oppression and violence, God redeems their life. Their life is precious in his sight. Proverbs 17:5 says, when you insult the poor, you insult your maker. All over the place, the Bible tells us the way we treat the most vulnerable people socioeconomically is virtually synonymous with the way we treat God. Another translation of Proverbs 17:5. If you mock the poor, you mock God. God could have been born in a lavish, luxurious place if God wanted, don't you think? It was by design that God came left out and excluded to a poor couple who were vulnerable, who had nothing. Same deal with the shepherds. The angels came to the shepherds first. The divine showed up on earth to the lowliest of the lowly. The shepherds were on the bottom. They were out there in the fields with the sheep. Nothing fancy, as lowly as it gets. Not even blue collar. So don't miss that point. God is not trickle down. God is bottom up. If you want to really get what God's doing, start at the bottom. That's one of the main points of the Christmas story. And I know it's a hard truth to come by, because the truth is, yes, God loves everyone the same. God loves rich people unconditionally. God broods over rich, privileged people. But if and when there is a choice to be made, the Bible makes it quite clear that God is on the side of the poor when a side must be taken. Yeah, it's a hard truth to really get our minds and our hearts around. As one of my mentors and teachers, whom I've often shared with you, Gordon Cosby, founding pastor of the Church of the Savior, the way he once put it, he said, following Jesus is not for real unless it leads at some point to an actual redistribution of resources, including money. Resources must flow from those who have more than they need to those who do not have enough, if we're going to dare call ourselves Christian. All right, so I'm going to leave that there for now, but that's one of the main points I don't want us to miss. It's right there at the beginning of our Jesus story, that God is with us, coming to us, specifically among the least. And that is always a threat to the privileged elite at the top, who, like Herod, are obsessed with power and will do anything, including lie, manipulate, threaten, coerce, and kill innocent people. in order to stay in power and protect their elite status. That's right in the story from the beginning. So we should never be surprised when people in power callously disregard the needs of the most vulnerable, and who will lie, manipulate, and do some pretty horrible things in order to avoid organizing their life and their society in such a way that it's best for the people on the bottom. It's part of our story. All right, second point, and these others won't be as long. God's love and light and blessing is for everyone. That's the real meaning of Epiphany. The star led these non-Jewish astrologers to come and acknowledge that the divine had come to earth and blessed this child in a special way. And it's hard for us to get this. But remember, most Jews were convinced they were the only ones who were in with God. Everybody else, whom they referred to as the Gentiles or the nations, foreigners in some translations, but everybody else was in big trouble with God as far as they were concerned. They were the only ones. And here, right here at the beginning of the Christian story, we have these foreigners coming and acknowledging that the divine is here, and them together paying homage. Unfortunately, history has interpreted that, by and large, as saying that the Christ was given authority to dominate over the rest of the world. And that misunderstanding led to some of the horrors of Christian history, like the Crusades, like the Inquisition, like the genocide of native indigenous peoples, when the real meaning is that God's love and light is for everyone. That everyone can and does come together when Christ is at the center, because Christ is in us all and with us all and for us all. For those of you who practice yoga, it's the same truth as namaste. The light of the divine in me sees the light of God in you. And when I'm in touch with that in myself and you are with you, we are one. We see that oneness here as they gathered around the light come to earth. And this is a never-ending process of us realizing that God's agenda, and once you see this, it's everywhere. It's the entire process of the New Testament, that starting thinking, well, we're the only ones, that just every time that wall gets knocked down, that box gets opened up again, and we realize, no, God is for everyone. Everyone's welcome. Everyone's included. And so it boils down to a dictum, this second point, and that is that any time in the name of Christ, in the name of God, you hear someone deciding who's in and who's out, who belongs and who doesn't, who's okay with God and who's not, who's going to heaven and who's not, who's clean or unclean, who's too sinful to come to the communion table. Anytime you hear that, hold it with suspicion, because it's violating the spirit of Epiphany. That tells us, we are open and affirming, not because we're liberal or progressive, but because we're trying to follow the implications of this story. Okay, finally, and I'll stop with this. The Epiphany says that they followed the star and that the light has come. As John puts it in his gospel, the light shines in the darkness and the darkness has not overcome it. As Isaiah put it, arise, shine, for your light has come. And I just want to end by bringing this light of God closer to home for us. Maybe it's easier this year for us to understand what it means to live in a land of deep darkness, for a lot of reasons. And our faith is saying, yeah, but you know what? The light is still shining. It will always shine. And it will do what light does. What does light do? It heals. It reveals. It exposes sometimes. But maybe most importantly for us today, it helps us find our way. Sometimes the darkness or the fog, metaphorically, is so thick that it's hard to see very far ahead. And this beautiful truth tells us that don't worry, the light is with you. You ever been in a great storm, snowstorm or rainstorm, when it's coming down horizontally or the fog is thick and you can't, even if you've got headlights in your car, you can't see functionally very far. Just a few feet. But that's enough. If we can see the side of the road and find our bearings, slow down, and just see, sometimes you got to stop, but if we're walking, if you can just see where your next step needs to be, sometimes that's all you can do. And the good news is that's enough. And for some of us, getting older, let's face it, and approaching the end of life here on earth, it's kind of like reaching the end of the day. And you know, the day's almost over. It's coming to a close. It's just natural. The night is coming. And it gets harder to see, sometimes literally. Harder to stay clear. Our brains do what they do as we get older. And as some have described it to me, it feels like things are getting a little dimmer. And then a lot dimmer. And if you're listening now and that's hitting painfully close to home for you, or if you love someone for whom it is, then I want you, and I know our church wants you, to know that we'll hold the light for you. If you can't see, we'll be your eyes and make sure you get where you need to go. Even though it gets dark and you can't find your own way, there comes a point where you don't have to. It's okay. God's with you, and so are we. And the darkness can never overcome that light. And light will always lead you home. Trust that.